When it comes to making trash terrain, I don't think one specific food container gets as much play as the almighty Pringles can, and for good reason. Excited to have not one but two cans at my disposal, I set about building a piece of terrain appropriate for a multitude of settings. The facade of a ruined church. So let's take the garbage goat for a spin. Let's talk real quick about what we're using for this build. As mentioned, we have a Pringles can, another brand of tube chips, the cap of a laundry detergent bottle, some popsicle sticks, and our old friend foam core board. Some things I thought to incorporate as the build progressed include a styrene sheet, also known as plasticard, barbecue skewers, toothpicks, and some pebbles and stones from this wild wacky place called Outside. But before we start gluing anything together, we need to have a plan. I want our tubes to act as towers on either side of the central structure. So I jot down some quick measurements and put them down on the desk to get a vibe for dimension and spacing. Once I'm happy and have an idea, I fire up the laptop because we're about to go digital. For the unfamiliar, this is Adobe Illustrator, and it's a vector-based drawing program. With it, we're going to build a quick template to avoid any hand-drawn tomfoolery as we set our design to the board. With an artboard size to a piece of paper, that's the white space, I'm going to get about sketching the basic dimensions. With our tubes coming in at 9 inches, I don't want to go any higher than that, and I think 6 inches across is probably a good width. I'll start with a door. Big enough for larger infantry models to fit through, so I'm gonna guess 3 inches wide and 2.5 inches tall. And I'd like to add a second story for interactivity in games, but for that we'll need windows so everyone can see out. Just a few across the center of the template, easy. And of course, this is a church, we need a rose window, like one would see on a typical cathedral. And lastly, a peaked top, because it fits the aesthetic. After a little thought, I wind up scaling the door down, and add some templates on a second page for anything else I might need to cut out later, such as windowsills and a door frame. And as a thanks for watching, my dear viewer, I'm going to include a link for this template in the description. Alright, I think it's in a good spot. So using a box cutter and ruler, I cut out the windows and door. Then I slap it against my foam core sheet and trace it with a pencil. With the graphite visible on the template, I can start to cut it out. My method for cutting is to score the lines lightly with a knife, making sure that the first one is as straight and correct as I can get it. Then ramp up the pressure on the subsequent cuts. That first scoring cut will keep the blade along its path. And be sure to keep the scraps, we're gonna need them later. For a round cut like this rose window, I like to use a little puncture guide instead of one big initial scoring cut. I'm using a thumbtack this time around and then follow it up with the knife. Not the cleanest cut, but that's okay. Let's quickly use some sandpaper to smooth out the windows. No danglies, please. At this point, we can see what the facade looks like between the two cans. Very exciting. And while I love making foam core buildings, in my opinion, it's critical that they have some sort of 3D elements. So using the templates from earlier, I cut out my door frame and glue it to the main facade. As for the windows, I don't really think I'm gonna use the template I made. Instead, I take out the pieces I cut out from the windows and just trim them down to about 5mm across. I'm not gonna worry about the rose window yet, stay tuned, I've got something special in mind. As I've said before, I want a second floor. This is where the popsicle sticks come in. I mark a line halfway between the top of the doorway and the bottom of the windows as a rough guide for placement. And if I go 3 sticks wide, it should be enough to hold an average-sized squad of minis. While the popsicle sticks are about long enough to span the back of the facade, I don't like the round ends, and I want it to look a little ramshackle. So I start snipping off the ends and cutting the sticks down to different lengths for a hardwood plank floor look. Now to hold the floor together, I'm gonna bust out the barbecue skewers and trim them down to a workable length. Initially, I fixed them down with super glue, but then I'd just drip on a few globs of wood glue for a stronger bond. It doesn't matter, not too many people are gonna be looking down here anyway. Once dry, I'm going to punch them into the foam core for a stronger fit. I line up the floor with the facade, then mark down where the skewers touch with a pencil, puncture some guide holes in, and glue that ish down. Then I take some foam core scraps to cut some trapezoidish, wing-like shapes to act as further supports on either end of the floor on the underside. And I'll do something similar for the base of the structure, but this is to help the whole thing stand a little more upright, as adding that floor has made it very back heavy. But with that, our church facade is in a great place and we can turn our attention to the Pringles cans. The first tower I envision as heavily damaged, ruined even. So I line it up next to the facade and use a Sharpie to mark out where I want to cut this sucker down to. I try to leave the top of the tube intact for a little trick I want to show you later, but otherwise, I just go hog with the scissors. Like with the foam core, I'm saving the scraps, I have plans for these. But I'm also gonna disregard the template I made on my computer for the tower windows and just use a piece of scrap tube. I trace the scrap piece onto the tower, making sure it's roughly level with the windows on the facade. Using that same technique, I'm gonna hop over to the other tower and trace out a window here. Though I don't want to leave this window open, however, because I'm planning on closing the top of the tube, and God forbid any minis or dice fall inside. So I take another segment of the green can and glue it to the interior to create a sealed window. And while we're here, let's just go ahead and clean up all that chip dust from the inside of the tubes. Remember how I saved the top of that can? Well, I slapped that puppy down on a piece of foam core and traced the inside. This is going to be the support layer for an interior floor in the ruined tower, and this way it'll fit snugly inside. Then I just spread some glue over it and lay a bunch of popsicle sticks across. Then when they're dry, we can trim them down just right, easy flooring. Now, I'd like this to be level with the floor behind the facade, and a quick measurement tells me it's about 70mm from the bottom of the Pringles can. But something I wouldn't like is for the floor to break free from its position after I glue it in, so I have an idea. So what I do is take another barbecue skewer and punch it all the way through the can, just under my measurement, and glue it in place. This way, my new floor platform can't sink to the bottom. Just a little wood glue here and there, and I pop the floor in on top. Once it's dry, it's super easy to trim down and sand. I'm so pleased with how that's coming together. I've never put a floor in a tower like this before, and I'm calling it a success. That ruined tower is in a great position, so let's turn our attention to the other tube of not legally potato chips. This laundry detergent cap would be an excellent spire / copula / whatever the actual architectural term is, and it would fit perfect if I hadn't already done a ton of dry fitting and loosened up the connection. But we have this new skewer support technique, which we know works a charm, and we'll apply it here as well. Just glue it down and we're cooking, Tower 2 complete. And at this stage, we're almost ready to start putting the whole thing together. Let's start by putting it on top of a foam core board and sketching out a rough footprint of the final structure. Afterwards, we sketch out the perimeter of the full terrain piece, base included, with plenty of wiggle room for ground dwelling decor. Once that's done, cut it out, trace the base on another sheet, cut that one out, then spread a little wood glue, and put them together to dry. I like doubling up the base to prevent warping, but I'm going to be doing some pinning here too so the thickness doesn't hurt. While the base dries, there's a few other things I want to knock out before final assembly. I'm going to put a few cuts into the peak of the facade, make that look weathered so it doesn't look so out of place when next to an obliterated tower. Speaking of, I'm going to cut out some of the ruined tower's walls so the floor inside will be nicely accessible from the second floor of the facade. Now, I learned in a past video that acrylic paint doesn't like adhering to certain types of plastic, and I got some great tips in the comments, which I appreciate, by the way. We both learned from these videos. They suggested scuffing the plastic to give it some tooth for the paint to adhere to. Other comments suggested holding an open flame to it, but since it's already glued to a cardboard tube, maybe not the best idea. Anyway, with the glue on the base dry, we can finalize this section. As always, we bevel the edges of our base and sand it down relatively smooth so we're ready to rock. Now, I don't trust the central facade to stand sturdy enough on its own. I'm going to pin it to the base, so I insert a trimmed toothpick covered in wood glue into the underside. Then I line it up with the footprint I've already drawn and mark where the toothpicks touch. Then I puncture some guide holes, apply glue, and set the structure down. Next up is the towers. I'm not so worried about pinning them as they're a little bit more sturdy standing upright, so glue it up and set it down. And now's the fun part, accents and accessories. Now, let's get some planks draped across the second floor to the tower using trimmed popsicle sticks. Unite both platforms into a single second story. Next up, we're going to take Pringles can scraps and cut them down into rectangles, then glue them around the towers here and there to suggest brickwork. But this is also how we hide where we punctured the skewers through those cans. And now finally, we can bust out the plastic card. I cut it into little squares and glue them to the base to act as the remains of whatever floor this church used to have. I don't mind the irregularities, it helps give a ruined, ramshackle appearance. I'll space them out a little bit on the back side of the build to make it look like they've faded into the dirt where the building has since disappeared. Now remember those foam core scraps we've been saving this whole time? Let's build some rubble piles. I'm going to cut them into these little random geometric shapes and glue them together haphazardly with some of our pebbles and stones. I mix up using hot glue and wood glue here, trying to see which I liked more, which ultimately was the wood glue, but you could get away with using either. I'm definitely building up some small piles next to those triangular ground supports in the back to hide them. And I figured, while I was still working on it, I'd give the facade the same suggested brickwork treatment by cutting some little rectangles out of plasticard. It's lucky I had that impulse though, because I had forgotten something. The frame for the rose window. I'm using plasticard for this one, and unfortunately, it's a real pain to cut out. No thumbtack trick for this. Too strong. But it does cut with scissors. One last step for the build, let's get some ground texture on this base. Now usually I like using a sprinkle of cat litter here and there before a full coat of sand. But this new sand I'm using has a variety of grit in it already, so I wind up just skipping the cat litter altogether after the first application. I work in halves though, because this base is big enough where I'm concerned about the glue losing its tack before I get all the way around. But now, finally, it's time to paint. Let's just take a look at that pile of garbage. There's something common to me about having a look at unpainted trash terrain. Almost a shame I have to rattle can it all black. After that's dry, we can start with the hand painting. I paint the dirt and wood areas with burnt umber. As always, I'm using cheap craft paint. Terrain doesn't need expensive miniature acrylics, and craft paint comes in quantity which you will need. I paint literally everything else with pewter gray, not forgetting about the rose window frame this time. Our next move involves the burnt umber again, this time thinned out to where it runs like water, and we're just going to stain all of the grainy areas with it. The dripping effect sells a weathered appearance. It's working in our favor here. Nice and grimy. With that dry, we're going to go back and dry brush the pewter gray over top of the stone. I decide to pull all of my brush strokes straight down, kind of thoughtlessly at first, but I really liked the effect, so I just continued doing it all the way around. We cast our eyes downward again as we work up the dirt, mixing a creamy color called parchment into the umber for a chocolatey gray, although maybe a little bit more chocolatey this time than normal, and dry brush the sand. We can hit the wood on the second floor with this mix too. Without putting our parchment away, we'll mix it in with the pewter gray and dry brush all of the bricks, windowsills, rubble piles, and door frame just to add a little variety to the otherwise monolithically gray structure. We're done with painting, but there's still some finishing touches to pull. We've got some woodland scenics clump foliage which we will glue into the corners where ruin touches ground. And along the edges of the base, we'll add some patches of flock for a natural appearance and some bright color. Oh, and speaking of bright color, let's talk about that rose window. Using the lid of one of our Pringles cans, I'm going to cut out a circle to make stained glass. We're using every part of the buffalo. I'll trace our window frame out with a Sharpie, then cut it out. I'll cut some notches out too. I doubt this window would remain intact for very long after abandonment. Then I use dry erase expo markers and color in some blobs here and there, trying to ensure that no two areas of the same color touch. Then I'll separate the segments with some lines of black paint, trying to keep them regular in width. I sprayed it down with some matte varnish off camera, but once it's dry, I glue it to the back of the frame, then glue the now finished window to the front of our newly completed ruined church. There is something about this build that just feels right. The complete size of the piece, the strong forward-facing facade, and interactive multi-level back kind of feel like an 80s, 90s toy castle for action figures. And that gives me a strong sense of accomplishment in terms of the design. I want to play games with it. It's one dynamic article, and applicable to basically all the genres I play. Medieval, World War II, fantasy, and highly specific dark fantasy and space genre. I didn't really know what I was doing as I pieced it together, and the process sounds much smoother on video than it was in reality. But I'm so happy with the end result, and beyond glad I got to share it with you. Thanks for watching, I appreciate you coming with me on another one of my hobby journeys. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps and it's free to do. This is Bristle Cult. Happy painting, happy building, happy whatever, I don't care, just have a happy of it.